What makes a Bible translation good or bad? What makes a Bible translation good or bad? Have you ever wondered that before? I'll give you one person's answer, one group's answer. Whenever I started into ministry, the first church that I went to was a church that used the King James Version of the Bible. How many of you still use the King James? Do we have any King James users? So a good number of people. So they were a King James using church. Now, I grew up on the King James. I didn't get my first NIV, I don't think, until maybe I was probably 12 years old or something like that, and I have a deep respect for the King James. I think it's gorgeous. I think it's an incredible translation with a lot of history behind it. Over, let's see, we're at 413 years, I think, since the book was translated. So it's got a rich history. I still remember verses from the King James that I learned as a kid. Whenever I do Psalm 23, I cannot help but remember it very much in the King James version of the Bible. I love that translation. I think it's wonderful. But I did not think that it was the best translation to use. I didn't think at the time it was the best translation to use to reach the next generation of people. And I thought, maybe we can work out some sort of compromise here. Maybe instead of the King James, we could use the New King James. And so that's what we compromised with, when I first went to that church. And it was very, good for a lot of people, but I found out pretty quickly that there was a small group in the church that was not just King James using, it's not just King James preferring, but they were King James only people. Not everybody, but there was a small number in there. And if you've never had the opportunity to interact with a King James only person, well, then you are missing out on some very fascinating experiences, let me tell you. Because they believe not only is the King James Version of the Bible a great translation, they believe it is the literally perfect translation. In fact, they would say it's the only perfect translation of the Bible. Many of them would go so far as to say it is the only one that carries God's stamp of approval, and that every other translation that's out there is a perversion of the Word of God. And some would even take it to the extent that you can't even be saved. A person cannot be saved apart from the King James Bible. Not that the King James Bible saves them, but that the message that's contained in it, the gospel, must be stated in that way in order for a person to be saved. Now, not all of them believe that, but there are many that do. And so, needless to say, when I started with the New King James Version of the Bible, this group was not happy with me. They did not like me at all for that reason. I found out one Sunday morning, I came in to church for the day, and I went into my office, which I kept locked, by the way, when I wasn't in there. I kept that office locked, and I found when I walked in that somebody had somehow gotten into my office and laid out this printout from the internet about why the New King James is the devil's translation. It's literally, that is what the message was, that is satanic, it's occultic, it is the devil. That is what I found when I went in there. And so I tried talking to these people. I tried to be patient. I tried to, persuade, debate, let's just talk this through, but nothing I said ever actually got through. It got to the extent that I actually emailed my seminary Greek professor one day, and I said, listen, we've got this group in the church that's King James only. How do I deal with this? How would you recommend that I deal with this? What can you point me to that maybe I could share with them to help them, understand where I'm coming from here? And I will never forget his response. His response, he said, the best thing probably that you could do would be to take that King James Bible and just hit them over the back of the head with it, because that's going to be probably more successful than any debate or conversation that you could ever have with them. Now, in fairness to this group, they love the Word of God. I am not downing them. They have a deep respect for the Word of God. They have a deep respect for that translation, which I do too, by the way. I'm not knocking that at all. But I did not take his advice, okay? But I tell you that to say this. If you were to ask them, what is it that makes a Bible translation good or bad? Their answer is real simple. It's just, is it the King James? And if the answer to that is yes, then it's a good translation. And if the answer to that is no, then it's a bad translation. Now, I think you can tell by the way that I'm telling the story that I would not answer the question that way, and I'm not going to answer the question that way. That'd be a simple way to do it. I could just stop right now. Just get yourself a King James, let's all go home, and you can just read that. And if you would read the Bible, man, that might not be that bad of a thing. If you would actually take that and go home and read it, it is the Word of God. But that's not how I'd answer the question. What I want to say to you at the very beginning is that there are lots of great translations out there. There's a lot of wonderful translations of the Bible. We are incredibly blessed. I don't know if you realize this. We are incredibly blessed as English speakers that there are over 900 English translations of the Bible. Did you know that? I bet you didn't, because I didn't know it either. I just found it out as I was studying this week. Over 900 translations of the Bible into English. Now, some of those are very old, older even than the King James. These would be things that if you picked it up, even though it's technically in English, you would not be able to understand it. But nevertheless, it is in English. I want you to let this sink in for just a second. In light of what I just told you, let this sink in. There are more English translations of the Bible than every other language put together. You realize that? There's more English translations of the whole Bible than there are every other language put together. We have lots of options here, and that is a good thing, but it can also be a little bit confusing. Don't you think? Have you ever been confused when looking at all the translations of the Bible, trying to figure out what's a good one, what's a bad one, what one should I use, what one should I study with, have my devotions in, what one should I bring to church? If you've ever been confused by that, I have good news and bad news. The good news is, like I've already told you, there's a lot of ways you can get this right. There are a lot of wonderful options of the Bible for you to use in English. That's the good news. The bad news is, all I can really do today is just scratch the surface. Like when I get done with this message today, I can confidently tell you, you will not be an expert at assessing translations. You're just not. I'm not an expert at assessing translations. As long as I've studied, I'm still not an expert, okay? So what I can give you today is just going to scratch the surface. I will also just let you know, I love to preach on Sunday morning. Much of this is more on the teaching side of things. So if y'all can forgive me and just allow me to teach a little bit this morning, it'll be good. I'll try to throw some preaching in maybe by the end of the message, but much of this is going to be very teachy in nature, just the nature of the question. All of them aren't going to be like this. This one just happens to be. But what I want to do for you this morning is I want to just answer a couple of very basic questions that, again, won't make you an expert, but will at least get you started. It'll at least get you going in the right direction and give you something to think about and chew on. And then after that, man, it's up to you. There are thousands of resources that you can point to if you want to become that expert. This ain't going to do it, but it'll set you on the journey, okay? So first of all, I want to look at what is a Bible translation. That seems like probably a goofy question to start off with, but I don't really think it is, because when we think of a translation, what most of us think is we just take the word from the original language, just find the equivalent word in English, and just put that equivalent word in there. It's just simple as that. Well, the Greek says this, English is this, let's just put them together. There's this easy one-to-one correspondence there, which is not the case at all. But actually what translation is, what you're doing when you're translating something is trying to convey the sense or the meaning of those words from another language into the language that you're translating into. That's what sense is. What does it mean? What is it trying to convey? What is it trying to get across to us? And so when you're talking about translating the Bible, you need to understand where the Bible comes from. You need to understand what languages the Bible was originally written in. And the Bible was originally written in 3 different languages. Who knows what they are? Does anybody know what language the Bible was written in? Greek, Hebrew, not Latin, but Aramaic. Good job. That's right. It was translated into Latin very early on, like around the 4th century. But that's what the Bible's written in. It was written in Hebrew. That's the bulk of the Old Testament. Almost the entirety of the Old Testament was written in ancient Hebrew, with the exception of one passage, which I find fascinating and cannot dig into today. But one passage in Daniel chapter 2, verse 4 through 7:28, is written in Aramaic. It just switches into Aramaic in that section of the book of Daniel. So that's the Old Testament. Bulk of it is Hebrew, a little bit is Aramaic, and then the New Testament, someone said Greek, and that is right. It was written in Greek, but specifically it is written in Koine Greek. That word Koine just means common. Remember we talked about years ago K groups or koinonia groups, and that comes from that word Koine. It just means common. So it's the word that we translate many times as fellowship or partnership. But when we talk about koine or common Greek, it's just the Greek that ordinary, regular people would have spoken, right? That would be like in opposition to classical Greek, for instance. When you talk about classical Greek, you're looking at a very literary Greek. You're looking at a more fancy kind of Greek, maybe you would say. This would be the Greek of the ancient Greek poets, the Greek story writers and playwrights, the Greek philosophers and historians. You could think people like Homer, think people like Plato. That would have been more like classical Greek. This is just common, everyday, ordinary Greek. There is also in the New Testament a couple of instances of what we call transliteration. Transliteration just means bringing something over from one language into another language without translating it at all, right? And a lot of times these are proper names that might get brought over untranslated. Sometimes it might be place names. I don't know why they decide to transliterate some and not others. But transliteration means just bringing it in untranslated. You see that especially in Aramaic in the New Testament, and in particular, the words of Jesus. A lot of people believe Jesus spoke Aramaic. That was the language that Jesus spoke when he was in his earthly ministry. So one good example of that has both translation and transliteration in the same verse is from Mark 15:34. We did receive a question about this verse, and when somebody submitted a question not related to the translation, by the way, but about the theology of the verse. But Mark 15:34, listen carefully to what it says. It says, "And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,' which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Now, there is a lot going on in that one little verse related to translation. If you notice, just initially, you notice the transliteration in the verse. What does Jesus say on the cross? What are the actual words that came out of his mouth? He said, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani." What is that? That's just Aramaic, untranslated, brought into the manuscript. That would have been literally what you would have heard if you could have heard Jesus on the cross crying out. He would have cried out in that Aramaic, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani." But then if you notice, Mark actually translates it for us in the middle of it. Look at what he said. He said, "which means." What is that? Which means, what is that? Translation, right? That's translation that Mark does in the middle of the verse. And he translates it originally into Greek, which means, he tells us, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But it's even really more complex than that. Please don't let your head spin. I'm just giving examples in all these little things that I'm talking about here, just to help you see what I'm talking about here. It's a little even more complex. So you have Jesus on the cross, and he's crying out in Aramaic. Right? He's speaking that. But what is he crying out? He's actually quoting Psalm 22 there. What was Psalm 22 originally written in? What did I tell you? It was originally written in Hebrew. So you have Jesus speaking in Aramaic, quoting Psalm 22 that was originally Hebrew, and then you have Mark translating it into Greek, which means, and he writes it out in Greek what it means, and then the English translator has to take all of that and put it into English. That's a lot of translation just for one verse, isn't it? But some of it, thankfully, Mark did the work for us, all right, by translating it for us. So the Bible translator has to know the original languages inside and out. And that is not an easy task, as you might imagine. For one, a lot of the Hebrew words that we see in the Bible, a lot of those words are very obscure words. And you'll see sometimes the translator admits that in the footnotes. Sometimes you'll see a little footnote that says, the Hebrew meaning of this word is a little uncertain. I added a little in. We have a good idea, but it's a little obscure. In the Greek, for instance, there are Greek words in the New Testament that do not show up in any other manuscript anywhere in ancient history. In fact, there's a lot of commentators and scholars that believe Paul just created words on the fly by inspiration of the Holy Spirit. He just made up a word. And a lot of times those would just be like compound words that you don't see anywhere else. It's just like Paul took two words, put them together, and formed one word. That makes me feel good because I make up words all the time. A lot of times I think I'm not making it up, but as it comes out of my mouth, I realize I don't even think that's an actual word. But I feel good about that because Paul did it too. It's actually in the Bible. So it's not easy because of the words themselves, but it also requires a lot of technical knowledge that's not related just to the words, not related just to the vocabulary. The translator of the Bible has to be an expert at the grammar of the Bible, because it's different than our English grammar. They have to be an expert on form and structure in the text. We'll come to that in a little bit. They have to be an expert even on cultural things and on background matters. You need to know a lot of stuff in order to be able to translate the Bible. There are translations of the Bible that go horribly wrong, but not because of vocabulary, but because the person translating it did not know the grammar. I'll give you one example. In John 1:1. John 1:1. The New World Translation, that is the Jehovah's Witness translation of the Bible, which I would not recommend. Not recommending that one at all. But the New World Translation absolutely butchers John 1:1. Okay? I want to show you how that can impact even theology. So in John 1:1, the ESV says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's how you know the verse, right? More or less, that's the way that you have learned that verse. And that is a correct and good translation. While the New World Translation translates it like this, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word, all good so far until now, was a God. Does anybody see the problem in that? What I want you to know is that's not a vocabulary problem. The vocabulary of that translation is absolutely correct. Those are the right words. Where it goes wrong is the grammar. They botched it because of the grammar. It's a real simple Greek grammar rule that they did not know. Whoever translated this did not know. And so it creates this massive theological problem, right? So you have a grammar problem that creates a massive theological problem. Now you have Jesus being one God out of many. Right? So can you see how even one, what you might consider a minor translation issue, just adding an indefinite article into the verse that actually is in the Greek, right? In the Greek, it is an indefinite. But there's a rule they didn't know, and so that creates all this confusion. It creates heretical teaching. Now you have Jesus being a God among many. That's why so much care has to go into every single good translation. And it is a very tedious process. Very tedious. How many of you have ever taken a foreign language? You ever taken a foreign language before? How tedious is it? Especially early on, when they give you a passage in the other language and say, now I want you to try to translate this into English. And you're going through and you know the vocab, you know a lot of the words, but you're missing some of the grammar. You know, they add the grammar a little more as you go. You're missing some of the case endings because English doesn't have those in the same way. You're missing some of the tenses because they've got some tenses we don't have. And you wind up botching the translation. I have a lot of sympathy for people that come to the U.S. but don't speak English as they're trying to communicate with me. And you get this impression that maybe they're not so smart when you listen to them talk. And then you try to do that in their country and see how you sound. And they're all sitting there talking about, gosh, that American really screwed up his Spanish, right? So you feel like an idiot when you try to do it. It's tedious. And it's very tedious when it comes to the Bible, because the Bible, those old manuscripts that it originally came in, y'all okay? Are you good? I got a lot of information, okay? Those old manuscripts, as they were originally written, we don't have the originals, but the way it was written back then, was completely different than the way that we read and the way that we write. They had no punctuation. Can you imagine that? There's no punctuation. There's no spaces in between words. There's no capitalization. There's no verse numbers. It just all ran together. English teachers would be horrified if we wrote the way that the Greek writers and the Hebrew writers wrote. And Hebrew is even more confused. I put a manuscript in there, Becky. If there's an example of an old Greek manuscript. I don't know how well you can see that. But if you look close, you can just see it just all runs together. All right? And so when you're reading that and trying to translate from that, you got to figure out where one word ends and another word begins, and where one sentence ends and another sentence begins. Then I have a Hebrew. Is that in there? Did that show up? You can't even see that. I didn't know how it would come out on the page, but that's an example of Hebrew. Now, when you look at that, just picture that you're also, on top of no capitalization, no punctuation, no verse numbers, no nothing, you also have to read it from right to left instead of left to right, because Hebrew is written from right to left. I took Greek and Hebrew in seminary. I took Greek over the course of 2 years. I'm semi-competent in it, just barely competent in Greek. I can read it okay. I can know a number of the vocabulary words. Not an expert by any means, but I can do it okay. Hebrew, I took it in summer school. I learned enough to pass the class. I might have made a B or an A. I don't even remember what I made, but I took it in summer class. Do you think I still remember it? Absolutely not. I remember it looks just as much gibberish to me as it does to you. So it's very tedious process. On top of that, let me just throw this tidbit in. Some of this is trivia for you. It ain't going to change your life, but it's interesting. On top of that, Hebrew originally had no vowels in the written language. The written language. They had vowels when you spoke it, but the written words had no vowel points on them at all. The vowel points were added later on. And so the translator of an original or an old ancient manuscript also has to figure out, because one word in Hebrew could have multiple different meanings depending on what vowel points you add to that word. Right? So it's incredibly tedious. And the translator has to take all that into consideration in coming up with a good translation of the Bible. Again, there's a reason why not just anybody can translate the Bible or should try to translate the Bible. It requires expertise that takes years upon years of study and mastery. Now, you could do it. You could do it if you wanted to do it, but just be prepared. You're going to be digging in for a while before you find yourself actually capable of trying to translate a passage from the Bible. So that's the task that we have. All right? Does that give you just a small feel for why it's not just, well, we'll just find the word here and put that word in there and just move on to the next word? It doesn't work like that. There's a lot of complexity to it. Now, I want to answer the actual question that was asked. Okay? What is it that makes a translation good or bad? Now, I could talk about a bunch of things today. There's a lot of stuff that I could say, but I'm just going to put them in two categories. That's how I'm going to handle it this morning. I'm going to put this in two categories. What makes it good? Two categories. A good translation should be accurate and it should be readable. It needs to be accurate and it needs to be readable. When I say accurate, I mean it needs to conform as closely as possible to what the original language said. It should conform as closely as possible to what the original language said. That's what I mean by accuracy. Now, why do we care about accuracy? Why would you think we would care about accuracy in the Bible? Well, because we're talking about the Word of God. This is God's revelation of Himself, without which we would not know Him. We could assume some things about Him from looking at creation, but we would not know Him. We would not know Him particularly in a saving way apart from how He has revealed Himself in His Word. And God inspires, 2 Timothy 3:16, inspired every word of the Bible. It is breathed out by God, and that means that we should care about every word, every thought, every meaning. It is crucial above everything else that we get this right. When you're talking about accuracy, it's not the place for sloppiness. And so I want to give you two different translation philosophies that help guide how this is done, how this is accomplished. There's two translation philosophies. This is something I do think that you need to know because there are good translations that follow both of these philosophies, okay? So you have something called formal equivalence, and then you have something called dynamic equivalence. There's other words for it. I'm going with these two, formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence. So formal equivalence translations, those are versions like the English Standard Version. That's what I preach out of, the ESV. That would be the New American Standard Version. That would be the King James Version. And what these are trying to do is they're trying to give you, as much as possible, a one-to-one translation from the original language into English, as much as is possible. Sometimes people call these literal translations, but I would say to you, that is not accurate. It's a manner of speaking, but it's not accurate because there is no such thing as an actual literal translation of the Bible. It's not even possible. But the idea behind this translation is to keep the original words as transparent as possible in the English, right? You want to be able to, as you look at the English, you can be pretty confident that that word they picked represents a word or two that is actually in the Greek text, okay? So that is what a formal equivalence translation is. And on the other side, you have a dynamic equivalence. And this is where you're not necessarily trying to go word for word, but you're trying to go thought for thought or meaning for meaning. You're trying to capture the meaning, sometimes at the expense of the words. So sometimes there may be words that don't go one-to-one into the new translation, but you still captured the thought or the meaning behind what was in the original manuscripts. And that would be a translation like the New Living. How many of you use the New Living translation? Anybody in here use that one? We went through that as a church a number of years ago when Bruce was here in a one-year NLT Bible reading plan. Great translation, but that is an example of a dynamic equivalence. A little further to the middle is the New International Version. Does anybody use the NIV, New International Version? Again, more on the dynamic side of things. But what I want you to see, I don't know if I have that chart, there's a spectrum. And I know you can't see that. I don't intend for you to really see it in detail. We're going to put something like this online this week for you. We'll put it in the app or put it somewhere where you can see this. But this gives you an idea of the range. It's a spectrum from formal equivalence, which is the most literal as it can be on one side, to dynamic on the other side, and that gets all the way even to a paraphrase, for instance, like the Message. The Message is not a translation of the Bible, it is a paraphrase. It's very loose with the actual words that are in there. So it falls on a spectrum, and there are extremes, like I mentioned, there's extremes on either side. And I tend to shy away from the extremes because I believe, not because they're bad, okay? Don't hear me. In all these things, I'm not saying that one's bad and one's good other than the New World Translation I mentioned earlier, but I tend to shy away from the extremes on both sides because I think that you lose a little something when you go too far in either direction. I think when you go too far on the dynamic side of things, you lose a little bit of the flavor of the original. It winds up being way too colloquial. It winds up sounding like two teenagers having a conversation. This would be like, Jesus came up to the disciples and he was like, "What's up, y'all?" It'd be something like that. And I think that's, you could conceivably get away with translating it that way. It's not for me, though, all right? That's not for me. That's a little too dynamic for my taste. And then on the other hand, I think if you go too far on the formal side of things, I think you lose a little something in terms of readability. The formal translations, the further you get to the far extreme, wind up sounding so wooden that it doesn't really make that much sense in English. This would be something like, just a little example, this would be something like translating, "And Jesus spoke." That's a manner of writing in Greek that doesn't translate in English very well. We don't speak that way. It doesn't make a lot of sense to us. So that's what you get when you go too far on the formal side of things. And so what I would say to you is a good translation, I think, is trying to capture the best mix of the actual words that were used, but also the sense or meaning that those words are trying to convey. And if you say, "Tell me what are some good translations that are a nice mix of those two things," what I would tell you is the New International, the NIV, It's a really good translation that balances both of those things. I would say the ESV is a great little mix there. It does fall more on the formal side of things, but I think it's a nice balance of readability and accuracy, a nice balance of dynamic and formal or functional equivalence. And then I think something like the Christian Standard Bible, which I bet none of you have ever even heard of, but it's a really excellent translation. It's a great balance between readability and accuracy there. So all of those are a good balance there. And the task there of getting that accuracy down, it's really easy when it's straightforward. You know, if it's a straightforward verse, it's very easy to translate. If a verse says, Jesus spoke to the crowds, that's pretty simple, right? I mean, there's a way of saying that very simply from Greek to English. But there's times that it's not so straightforward. And in those times, decisions have to be made. I'll just give you one example there. What about metaphors? Sometimes words have literal meanings, but they also have metaphorical meanings. The translator has to figure that out. One example is the Hebrew word for house. The Hebrew word for house is bet. How many of you know Bethlehem means house of bread? So literally, it means house. Just like you go home to your house, it's the word bet. But metaphorically or figuratively, it also means family line or lineage, right? Maybe descendants would be a good way of talking about it. So when a translator sees the Hebrew word for house, bet there, they have to decide whether that word is being used literally or whether it's being used metaphorically. If the verse says they went into the house, that's pretty easy, right? That's literal, right? That's not metaphorical at all. They walked into the house, and the job is pretty simple. You don't have any choice to make. But if it's being used metaphorically, then he has to decide whether to keep the word house or whether to say something like family line, lineage, or descendants. In Luke chapter 2, when it tells us that Jesus was of the house and lineage of David, most every translation translates it just that way, house and lineage of David. The NLT translates it David's descendants. So they made a different decision there, you see. They didn't bring the word house over from Greek into English, or the word from Hebrew to Greek to English, right? They didn't do it that way. They choose to translate it by what it means, not by what it says, right? That's the difference. Now, both of those are fine ways to translate it. The point I'm trying to make is it's not always straightforward. It's not always straightforward. When you're looking at accuracy and these two different philosophies, it's not always straightforward how it works. Another example are idioms. I love these. These are good. Idioms are like quirks in language. It's stuff that if you meant it literally, it would either sound very weird or it wouldn't make any sense. But if you know the idiom, if you have that idiom in your culture, then it makes perfect sense. One example in English, an English idiom would be, it's raining cats and dogs. All right? That's an English idiom. Now, we all know exactly what I mean when I say it's raining cats and dogs, right? Nobody's out there looking to see, hey, are there literal felines and canines falling from the sky? Nobody thinks that. No, we know the idiom, right? But if a culture read that and tried to translate it from English into their language and did not have that idiom, then they have a decision to make in that moment. They're going to be pretty confused, right? What do they mean by it's raining cats and dogs? I'm going to give you one example from the Bible. 2 John chapter 12. Verse 12. There's only one chapter. 2 John verse 12. In the ESV it says, though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. Now, the ESV, that's a formal equivalent translation, but in this case, they did not go formal or literal here, because the actual Greek does not say face to face. The actual Greek says, I want to come and see you that we may talk mouth to mouth. That's a Greek idiom, mouth to mouth. Now, if I tell you I have something I need to tell you, but I want to tell you mouth to mouth, how do you think that's going to go? We don't do that idiom. I'm getting reported to somebody for some stuff. All right? That it doesn't translate very easily, right? So now I have to make a decision, right? There's lots of examples like that in the Bible where the translator has to figure out the sense of the words or phrases, and then the translator knows it says mouth to mouth, because why? They know the vocabulary. They know that it says stoma, tal stoma, or whatever it is. They know the vocab, but it's an idiom. So do I translate that idiom literally? Do I use an idiom that makes sense in our language, which is what most of the translations went to, which is what, face to face? That's how we would say it. If I need to tell you something, I want to tell you face to face. I don't want to tell you over the phone. I don't want to tell you in a letter or an email. I don't want to text it to you. I want to tell it to you face to face, right? So that's what almost every English translation does. They brought it into English as face to face. Now, are they being unfaithful to the Bible by doing that? Even the King James, by the way, it doesn't go mouth to mouth, right? No, they're not being unfaithful. They're conveying the sense that John had there, which is, I want to tell you something in person, all right? So the idioms are sometimes hard to translate. I'm going to give you one more just for fun. I've done this one before, but it's like compassion in Greek. Do you remember the word for compassion in Greek? What does it refer to? When we talk about compassion, like, man, my heart goes out to you, right? That's what we would say, right? Man, you see somebody hurting, you see somebody going through some stuff, you say, man, my heart goes out to you. Well, in Greek, they didn't use that idiom. They would talk about the bowels. That's got a different feel too, right? It's like, man, my bowels really were moved when I saw what you were going to. I'm sorry for being crass. I'm just telling you that is what's happening there. That is their little idiom for compassion. That's the way they would translate it. So the translator, have you seen many? The King James might do it a couple of times. Most translations do not do it that way, right? They might say he was moved with compassion. Well, that's not literally what it says, right? It's just the way to convey the sense of what Jesus is saying. And so a good translation is going to try to balance the desire to stay as close to the language as possible without losing the meaning in our language, right? That's what I mean by accuracy. But then there's also the issue, the second thing I said is readability. You can have a translation that is incredibly accurate but unreadable. That's possible. There's some out there like that. They're accurate, but they're not readable. And readability is about making the text accessible to people, right? Making it accessible just to regular people. So what I want you to see is Greek sentence structure and grammar do not translate without adjustments, not into English. You cannot just translate it literally, not the sentence structure or the grammar. They have tenses we don't have, cases we don't have. There are ways that they can say 3 or 4 different things with one word that we need 3 or 4 words to say, right? And so you got to look at readability. So Greek sentence structure, grammar, they don't translate. I already told you they don't write like we do, and I'll give you again just one example. This is one that you all know this verse, John 3:16. If you don't know this verse, come talk to me, and I'm going to lead you to the Lord after church is over. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whosoever believeth, or his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him, I'm going mixture of King James and regular, should not perish but have eternal life, right? That's how we all say it. We may use a different sort of variation of a word or two in there, but that's how we translate the order of that verse. Now, let me show you what it would look like if we translated that structure of that verse literal. This is what a literal translation might more sound like. Some semi-literal. So, listen carefully because it's a challenge. So, for loved the God, the world, that the Son, the only, he gave his, that whoever believes in him not should perish but have life eternal. Now, let me ask you a question. Is that readable to you? You can read it, but is it readable? Is it accessible in any way? No, we would never write it like that. It would be complete nonsense if we wrote this way in English. We might be able to get it if we try real hard, get the meaning of it, but after a while it might be so tedious to try to do it that we might not want to try to figure out what it says. It's like, I give up. This is too challenging. And that's a simple one there. So you have to adjust the sentence into a word order and into a structure that is readable in the language you're translating it into English in our case. And this is also, by the way, where punctuation comes into play, because there was no punctuation in the originals Translators have to decide where punctuation goes. They didn't have even helpful capital letters at the beginning of sentences, right? Greek manuscripts were all uppercase. Like I said, it was all uppercase, no punctuation, no verse numbers, no split between words, whatever, right? So a translator that brings it into English has to decide where to put that punctuation. And some Greek sentences, I think you know this, go on forever. I mean, forever. Ephesians, here's a good example. Ephesians 1, 3 through 14. There you go. There you go. And there's some spaces in there because of the limitations of the program I copied that from. Right? But originally there wouldn't even be any of those spaces there. Right? That is one sentence in Greek. One sentence. And that's not the only example of that in Greek. Right? So if you had that before you as an English reader, how many of you give up 2 or 3 lines in? Like, I have lost the plot. I do not even know what he's talking about anymore. My mind cannot hold that all together. That is way more complex than anything we would ever do. No, English people need shorter sentences. And so the translator, as they're working on translating the Bible, they have to figure out how to break that sentence down. What words, what thoughts need to be separated by periods or commas or colons or whatever. And then again, this is my preference. This is why I don't prefer translations that are too formal or too dynamic. All right, I'll give you one example. NASB, New American Standard, excellent version of the Bible. Highly formal, even in their sentence structure and such. And sometimes the NASB, while it's great for deep study of the Bible, I'm not even recommending against it. It's just a little bit harder to read sometimes because they hold sometimes too closely to the word order instead of adjusting it to how that we speak. On the other end of things, those dynamic side, the ones that go too extreme, I think they oversimplify the sentences too much. I think some of those, sometimes they read a little bit like an elementary school level book where the sentences are so short, right? They're too short for me. Not objectively too short, just too short for me. I don't like it quite that simple. In fact, I told people when we went through the NLT one-year Bible plan several years ago, I told people I'd read my reading for the day, and then I would feel like I got to go read it in the Bible afterwards. It'd be like, I've read it in the NLT, now let me go see what my Bible says, because it's a little short. Now, I'm not knocking the NLT, I'm just saying my preference, all right, on the order and structure. I like a nice balance. And again, if I could pick 2 or 3 that I think really do a great job, and I'm coming to a close here, 2 or 3 I think do a really good job of balancing all that out, I would say that the NIV, the ESV, and the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible, those 3 do an excellent job of balancing readability and accuracy. But the bottom line on this great question, and I promise, here's my promise to you. I'm going to hedge a little bit. This will likely be the only message that's quite this teachy, okay? So if you're leaving here today going, I need some preaching, go online. There's a lot of good sermons you can listen to out there. But I'm telling you, this will probably be the most teachy one that we do. But it's a great question. But the bottom line is, many of the most popular English translations are good translations for both accuracy and readability. If you go NASB, great. If you go NLT, great. If you go NIV, great. If you go HCSB, CSB, great. If you go ESV, great. Those are good translations of the Bible. It's hard to go wrong. Both of those are very accurate and very readable translations of the word in general. But the secondary question that we need to answer before I actually close is, which one will you actually use? That's what a lot of my seminary professors would say. You get into debates and conversations, and they say, well, the best translation is one you actually use. Which one are you actually going to use? And that's how I want to close today. Because this is not an academic exercise, even though it feels like it might be a little bit this morning. It's not an academic exercise at all. This is a matter of life and death because of the nature of what we're talking about here. What is the Bible? The Bible is the Word of God. What does the Bible do? The Bible makes us wise unto salvation. It teaches us. It rebukes us. It exhorts us. It pierces our heart and convicts us. It sanctifies us, John 17. It helps us to grow and to mature more and more into the likeness of Jesus. It points us to Jesus. It tells us who God is. It tells us who we are. It guides us in the way that we live. It tells us about the hope of heaven and about the horrors of hell. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 14, 10 and 11, Paul says, there are doubtless many different languages in the world, and none is without meaning. But listen to this. If I do not know the meaning of the language, I will be a foreigner to the speaker, and the speaker a foreigner to me. When you apply that to the Bible, do you understand what that means? Why do we need good translations? Because without it, God's a foreigner to us. And we're a foreigner to Him. We need a Bible we can read. We need a Bible we can understand. I want to tell you this morning, don't let yourself be a foreigner to God. Don't let God be a foreigner to you. There's absolutely no reason for it. I've already told you, we're blessed. We've got 900 translations of the Bible in English. But guess what? That means absolutely nothing if you don't pick it up and read it, and study it, and learn it, and love it. We have no excuse. In your pocket, you have access to dozens of translations of the Bible. And if you don't like digital versions, just get online and order you one, a physical copy. We've got no excuse. No excuse. But the truth is, I told you I was going to preach for a minute. The truth is, a lot of us take that for granted. There's a little over listen to me real carefully, there's a little over 7,000 languages in the world that are spoken. Over 7,000. Do you know how many of them have the whole Bible? Out of 7,000, a little more than 7,000. Do you know how many have the whole Bible? 736. There are people in cultures, lands, 6,000, I'm really bad at math, 6,067, something like that. Languages that have no representation of the Word of God in it. And my question for you today, you think about that. We got over 900. There's only 736 in the whole world. Language. Here's my question for you. If every English Bible disappeared today, would you even notice? If every English Bible disappeared today, would that affect your daily life at all? The Bible says in Psalm 119, 162, I rejoice in your word like one who finds great spoil. Is the Bible great spoil to you? Is it like a treasure that you've come across? Do you delight in the word? I want to close with one quote from a guy named William Tyndale. William Tyndale was the first person to translate and print the Bible into English from the original languages. From the original language, first person. Pretty controversial. In fact, they arrested and killed him for it. The Catholic Church arrested and killed William Tyndale for translating the Bible into English. But I want you to hear what drove him to die. He said, I defy the Pope and all his laws. If God spares my life these many years, I would make the farm boy who drives the plow know more of the Scripture than the Pope himself. What an incredible heart. Let's don't take that for granted. I don't know what God needs to do in your heart this morning. I don't know if maybe the challenge is not become an expert on Bible translation, probably not. But maybe the challenge is, you know what, I need to stop taking the Word of God for granted. I need to start reading it every day. I need to start memorizing, studying, learning it, so that I can know God, so that I can grow in God, so that I can apply it to my heart and live the way that He's called me to live.